In the Muqaddimah, or the prolegomenon to history, a foundational text for the discipline of historiography, the history of history, or the philosophy of history, by the 14th century scholar and historian Ibn Khaldun, the problem of orienting the world in terms of place and time is seen as subject to the uncertainties of memory and the imagination. Entire cities and civilizations appear and disappear without leaving a trace. The intersection of the long shadows they cast on myth with the fact of their enigmatic absence remain as riddles in the sand for historians. Today, here in Dubai, this shimmering mirage built in the desert of capitalism, it is interesting to consider that all that we might consider solid around us may in the course of time retain little other than the sense of tilism, the thin air of the power of enchantment. Ibn Khaldun begins his foray into the magic of cities, even if only to conduct a refutation of the magical mode of remembering by invoking a verse of the Surah Al-Fajr in the Quran. Did you not see what the Lord did with Iram, that of the pillars? The commentators on the Quran, says Ibn Khaldun, consider the word Iram the name of a city which is described as having pillars, that is columns. They report that Ad bin Us bin Iram had two sons, Shadid and Shaddad, who ruled after him. Shadid perished, Shaddad became the sole ruler, and the kings submitted to his authority. Now, when this Shaddad heard the description of paradise, he said, I shall build something like it. And he built the city of Iram in the desert over a period of 300 years. Iram is said to have been a large city, with castles of gold and silver and columns of emerald and hyacinth, containing all kinds of trees and freely flowing rivers. When the construction of the city was completed, Shaddad went there with the people of his realm. But when he was a distance of only 1 day and night from it, God sent a clamor from heaven and all of them perished. No information about this city has since become available anywhere on earth. The desert where the city is supposed to have built has been inhabited continuously, and travelers and guides have explored its roads in every direction. Yet no information on the city has ever been reported. No antiquarian, no nation has mentioned it. Had the commentators said that it had disappeared like other antiquities, the story would be more likely, but they expressly say that it still exists. Others go so far in their crazy talk as to maintain that the city lies hidden from sensual perception and can only be discovered by trained magicians and sorcerers. End of quote.
To draw a figure in time is to inscribe a mark on a difficult and slippery surface. As time passes, the reasons to remember grow stronger, but the ability to recall is weakened. Memory straddles this paradox. We could say that the ethics of memory have something to do with the urgent negotiation between having to remember, which sometimes includes the obligation to mourn, and the requirement to move on, which sometimes includes the necessity to forget. Both are necessary, and each is notionally contingent on the abdication of the other. But life is not led to the easy rhythm of regularly alternating episodes of memory and forgetting that can cancel each other out in a neat equation that can equal 0. Residue is the fulcrum on which the delicate negotiation between memory and forgetting is undertaken, because it is the unresolved, lingering aftertaste of an event that triggers the task of retrieving and dealing with the difficulty of its recollection. The question of what is to be done with residue, should it be burned, buried, frozen, embalmed, commemorated, carried over, forgotten, or remembered, haunts us all the time. It haunts us in our personal lives as much as it haunts the larger histories we participate in and draw from. To draw a figure in time is necessarily to encounter and reflect on the difficulty of the residual. There are no easy answers to the questions posed by residue. Images are not always the most reliable allies against forgetfulness. Words play tricks with memories. Oblivion is easily accomplished, especially with the aid of what is usually called restoration, which makes it possible to ignore or invert the action of time. Sometimes the work of art can be a matter of ensuring that the time it takes to think and recall difficult questions be given its due. That instead of purchasing the processed and instant sense of time mined from a monument or anything else, we explore the option of accessing the potential of even a modest memento to destabilize the certitude of the present. How can images and objects be brought together in a manner that helps etch a lingering doubt onto the heart of amnesia? How can concepts and experiences that sustain an attitude of vigilance against the impulse of erasure be expressed as tools to think and feel with, to work with in the present?
The past is a vast, open terrain. We live it in countless and complicated ways. The historical narrative is one significant way, but it does not exhaust or banish other ways of inhabiting the past. Art practice's biggest challenge today is to open the historical space to multiple readings of the past and to find ways in to contemporaneity, into its layers. The records can be made to reverberate with forms of life that do not banish the past, but make it haunt. Haunt us not as a dead weight, but as a wager, as a challenge to our confrontational attitudes to the relationship between contemporaneity, history, and the future. So let's keep the game open. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, maybe a first question to RAQS I wanted to ask, just in relation to that, which is, before we started the panel, you said you wanted to talk maybe a little bit about this idea of nonlinearity and I mean, what Mignolo talks in Local Histories and Global Design. Could you maybe elaborate on that?
Sure. I think the interesting thing to consider is to assume that things that have happened haven't necessarily ended, which is why we use this figure of the magical city of Iram in Ibn Khaldun's historiography. The city isn't there, but the idea of what it might have been continues to haunt everybody's obsession with the past. So in a sense, the idea of its lingering presence, sorry, not even its past, but its lingering present, that it may be physically absent, but lingering in the imagination, or lingering as an entity that can be discovered. So, which means that, and I think it's true of for instance, we come from Delhi where the lingering presence of many different conflicting pasts is always available. So it makes it very difficult to construct a kind of chronology or a linear hierarchy of events, but propose perhaps rules of a different game when dealing with the past and the present.
I think just to add on that there is a fundamental difference between the idea of past and the idea of history, and I think this is where the whole negotiation lies. Past is something which the narrative is made by me about my own past, or it's an open space. It's open for, especially for non-linearity, because memory works like that, or the imagination of the past, just like the imagination of the future, also works like that. History is a narrative that is done not necessarily by the self, or especially not done by the self, and this is also where the idea of non-linearity becomes interesting.